Good morning. Everyone enjoying their breakfast here? My name is Jeffrey Blankfort, and I'd like to welcome you here on behalf of IRmep's Mordecai Benunu Open Nuclear Dialogue Initiative. It's on a conference on Israel's nuclear arsenal, espionage, opacity, and future. I call it historic because even to publicly acknowledge that Israel has developed and been sitting on several hundred nuclear weapons for the past 2 or 3 decades is something that no sitting president or member of Congress has ever summoned the courage to acknowledge. And that includes, unfortunately, President Obama. This silence persists even while the President and Congress have just added additional sanctions against Iran to those already existing, clearly intended to bring Tehran's economy to a standstill. And for what? For perhaps, but not for sure, building a nuclear weapon that Israel developed through deception and theft, and whose existence it has refused to admit for the past 40 years. This silence persisted during the May 2010 review conference of the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons held at the UN headquarters in May 2010, at which the Obama administration agreed only to discuss making the Middle East nuclear-free zone at the next review conference, 2002. Now, yesterday, the President welcomed Prime Minister Netanyahu, what was described by Dana Milbank in today's Washington Post as a surrender to Israel. And this is what Obama said yesterday in his meeting with Netanyahu. Quote, "Finally, we discussed issues that arose out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Conference. And I reiterated to the Prime Minister that there was no change in U.S. policy when it comes to these issues. We strongly believe that given its size, its history, the region that it's in, and the threats that are leveled against us, against it, that Israel has unique security requirements. It's got to be able to respond to threats of any combination of threats in the region. And that's why we remain unwavering in our commitment to Israel's security. And the United States will never ask Israel to take any steps that would undermine their security interests." The wall of silence from the White House and Congress has long been attributed to an unwritten agreement made between President Richard Nixon and Prime Minister Golda Meir back in December 1969, never formally announced, in which Washington agreed not to comment on Israel's nuclear weapons program as long as Israel did not openly test weapons or declare or acknowledge their existence. The criteria was that was the basis for the strategic ambiguity of not introducing nuclear weapons to the region. A more likely reason is that had the United States acknowledged that Israel had nuclear weapons, that would require under U.S. law the freezing of all aid to Israel. And we know that's not going to happen. That Congress has also observed this agreement, to which it was not a party, is an indication that there are larger forces at work here. And you'll hear more about them from today's speakers. And this leads to a question sometimes asked partly in jest: which is a more important occupied territory for Israel, Washington or the West Bank? You probably have a better understanding of that before you leave than you do now if you don't already have come to a conclusion on that. The same code of congressional silence that keeps our representatives mum about Israel's nuclear arsenal is also enforced in the case of Israeli whistleblower Mordecai Benunu, in whose honor today's event is being staged. Mordecai Benunu, you may recall, had worked for nearly 10 years, from 1976 to 1985, as a technician at the Negev Nuclear Research Center near Dimona in southern Israel. After converting to Christianity in the early 80s, he became increasingly troubled by the nature of his work and concluded that the building of weapons of mass destruction was morally wrong. He left the Dimona Center in Israel to travel around the world, but not before taking photographs of what he saw while working at Israel's nuclear weapons factory. These photographs would later appear in the London Sunday Times after he ran into a Times reporter who he met in Australia. The Israeli response might have been predictable. Benunu was lured to Rome by a beautiful Mossad agent, where he was drugged, kidnapped, and smuggled back to Israel. In a trial that was held behind closed doors, he was sentenced to 18 years, the first 11 of which he served in solitary confinement. Benunu was finally released in April 2004, but was forbidden to travel outside Israel to meet with foreign journalists or foreign nationals of any sort, or own any kind of communications equipment, from a computer to a cell phone. I was fortunate enough to be in Jerusalem in 2004 to spend a morning with Benunu, and I found him a wonderful, warm human being. He was the man who Daniel Ellsberg, whistleblower of some note, referred to as the preeminent hero of the nuclear era. Benunu has since been sent back to prison several times for speaking with foreign journalists. At this very moment, he is again in an Israeli prison for the very same reason. On May 12th, 11 days before his current sentence was announced, Amnesty International issued a press release which said, quote, "If Mordecai Benunu is imprisoned again, Amnesty International will declare him to be a prisoner of conscience and call for his immediate and unconditional release," end quote. On June 18th, it did just that. I was unable to find a single mainstream U.S. publication that published the Amnesty International statement. And as I said earlier, there are larger forces at work here. A moment ago I mentioned at the U.S. Congress, which has a long history of holding the fate of Israeli prisoners near and dear to its heart, has made an exception in Benunu's case. I bring this up because at the end of June, both houses of Congress passed by unanimous consent resolutions calling on Hamas to release an Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, who was captured 4 years ago on the Israeli border with Gaza, and while manning a battle station which regularly shelled the people of besieged Gaza. You may also not be surprised to learn that Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, out my way in California, brags about carrying a copy of the dog tags of Gilad Shalit with her wherever she goes. I can't think of a better symbol for the state of affairs in Washington than that. It's been this way for many years, and unfortunately is likely to continue to be that way unless we do something about it. It is more than appropriate